Misinformation and disinformation are two big issues that we're dealing with today. And with today's online access and access to social media, it's easier than ever to share information with large groups of people, even if it's not necessarily true.
Millions of users worldwide share incorrect information on social media daily, whether they know it or not.
Climate change is a topic that is seriously affected by misinformation, so today we'll be explaining how the spread of misinformation on social media affects certain groups of people's opinions on climate change.
One of the cons to social media being so popular nowadays and reaching so many people is that misinformation and disinformation are very easily spread on social media platforms, and it reaches a much wider audience than it has in the past without social media. So to start, misinformation and disinformation are often used interchangeably, although they do not mean the same thing. So misinformation is the sharing of information that is false or correct, while disinformation is when somebody deliberately shares misinformation with the intent to mislead. So most of the time, the misinformation that's on social media is shared by just everyday users. They don't necessarily realize that the posts that they're interacting with or sharing is not necessarily true, while disinformation is shared by just a handful of very powerful industries that also have a social media presence. In general, the fossil fuel industry's strategy is just to, one, present a false reality of the negative effects that fossil fuels is having on our environment, and two, to encourage disagreements over the facts of climate change to create further division. And social media and online strategies help them do this because they are reaching a much larger audience, and they are also reaching a much larger audience who's more likely to share their possibly controversial opinions, because on social media you can hide behind your username or your account rather than actually having to speak as yourself. So aside from the false and misleading ads that are spread on social media about climate change, another negative effect of social media regarding climate change is that there are a lot of just false information and common myths that are very widely spread around social media that people don't necessarily know are false. The first climate change myth that I found on social media was that climate change is a natural process and it doesn't have to do with humans or our behavior. In reality, the vast majority of global warming has come from the burning of fossil fuels, oils, and gases, which is obviously human-caused. Another myth about climate change that's spread on social media is that scientists disagree on climate change. In reality, a 2021 report revealed that 99% of peer-reviewed scientific literature found that climate change is human-induced, and the overwhelming majority of the science community agrees that climate change is real and it's been caused by humans. And then the third myth that I found regarding climate change is that humans can evolve to manage climate change. While some humans in some very wealthy countries will be able to handle climate change, the fact is that the ecosystem and the planet just cannot, which then in turn will make it so humans cannot survive the effects of climate change. And according to the United Nations Environmental Program 2023 Adaptation Gap Report, the world's developing countries collectively need between $215 billion and $387 billion per year to adapt to climate change, which they just do not have. And even some wealthier nations will very much struggle to afford the cost of adaptation, and they will need to require radical measures such as displacing vulnerable communities, relocating vital infrastructure, and changing out staple foods. Overall, the climate crisis and climate change is something that will affect each and every one of us and every ecosystem on the earth, and the false information that's spread on social media regarding climate change just takes attention away from that, which is something that we really do need to be focusing on in these upcoming years.
Now we're going to talk about how climate change became a politicized issue. So climate change hasn't always been a politicized issue, but Andrew Hoffman, a professor of sustainable enterprise at the University of Michigan, says with the adoption of the Kyoto Treaty on climate change, attitudes shifted, says Hoffman. In 1997, what was previously a scientific issue became one that impacted powerful political and economic interests, and the divide started, he explains. So what the Kyoto Treaty the objective of it was to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. So this treaty was proposed in 1997 and signed in 1998 by Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat, who was president at the time. So of course the fact that he signed this treaty, it led to the issue being more politicized. So Pew Research Center found that while 72% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning Americans say human activity is driving climate change, only 22% of Republicans and Republican leaners agree. Anthony Leiserowitz, the Yale's programs director, says, however, the divide in this case goes beyond party politics and is rooted in opposing worldviews, egalitarianism, and radical individualism. So how this issue being politicized could lead to more misinformation is, one example of this is Charles and David Koch, who are conservative petrochemical magnates, which is just an influential business person. In an article written in 2021 on NPR, Jeffrey Peer and Scott Newman say that Charles and David Koch have poured millions of dollars into efforts to discredit the science of climate change. The brothers have given over $145 million to climate change denying think tanks and advocacy groups between 1997 and 2018. The Kochs were joined by their efforts in Exxon, which has given nearly $37 million over the same time to spread climate misinformation. So in another article, the Union of Concerned Scientists discuss how the Koch brothers have used the media to help misinform the public. It says too often the news media provided a platform for fossil fuel industry-funded groups to make misleading claims about global warming and renewables and allow them to pass themselves off as independent, disinterested parties.
Greenwashing has become a growing problem, where companies claim to be environmentally friendly without making real changes to their practices. Big brands like Coca-Cola and McDonald's have faced criticism for misleading the public about their sustainability efforts. Coca-Cola, for example, continues to rely on plastic bottles despite being the world's largest plastic polluter. Meanwhile, McDonald's has swapped plastic straws for paper ones, but still uses huge amounts of single-use plastics and contributes to food waste. These kinds of misleading claims not only confuse consumers, but also slow down the progress needed to tackle climate change effectively. Instead of making real changes, these companies are prioritizing their image over meaningful actions. When looking further into Coca-Cola, Earth Island Institute filed a lawsuit against the beverage giant for falsely advertising that it is sustainable and eco-friendly despite being the largest plastic polluter in the world. In 2020, the company came under fire when it announced that it would not abandon plastic bottles, saying that they were popular with the customers. McDonald's implemented paper straws to replace the plastic ones, but this was an ineffective way to go about reducing their footprint. Annual waste production approximately 150,000 tons of packaging waste globally. Single-use plastics from McDonald's, despite the straw initiative, a significant portion of McDonald's packaging still relies on single-use plastics. Food waste, an estimated 8 to 10% of food purchased by McDonald's, becomes waste, adding to landfills and methane emissions. Overall, with these two companies, the greenwashing accusations arose due to the companies claiming their packaging was 100% recyclable and that their product actually encouraged practicing safe recycling. In conclusion, greenwashing by companies like Coca-Cola and McDonald's can make climate change worse by misleading the public, delaying real progress, and allowing harmful practices like plastic use and food waste to continue. And instead of taking real steps to reduce their carbon footprint and make a meaningful impact, these companies contribute to ongoing environmental damage while distracting from the true action needed to fight climate change.
The spread of misinformation and disinformation on social media have played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of climate change, particularly among older populations. False information, including claims that climate change is not caused by human actions and that scientists disagree on its existence, undermine public trust in the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community that climate change is real. These myths are often fueled by large industries that promote misleading information to protect their interests rather than the interests of the customers and the earth.
The deliberate use of social media to disseminate these messages has further politicized the issue, turning what was once a scientific concern into a political battleground.
Furthermore, the phenomenon of greenwashing, where companies falsely advertise their environmental efforts, add to the confusion by distracting individuals from the actual environmental damage they cause.
As misinformation continues to spread, particularly through digital platforms, it becomes crucial to raise awareness about the difference between misinformation and disinformation, and to emphasize the importance of relying on credible scientific sources.
By doing so, we can better combat the climate change skepticism that has been amplified online and work towards meaningful action to address the global climate crisis.